We'll begin in just a moment. Need to make some adjustments here. Just give it a moment here. We're just getting started. Just waiting for some adjustments to be set in, and then we will begin. It is 7:30, Friday evening, September 30th, 2016. Shalom, this is Michael with Alive in Yeshua, because if you're not alive in Him, you are not truly alive. You must be born again, in other words. Okay, so we're going through the Gospels, an interwoven Gospels, not interwoven in the sense of parallel, side by side, similar passages, but in a way that has it where it's chronologically in order and details are not repeated, that are the same in separate Gospels, but none of the details are left out. So it's weaved together to have one fluent reading so that we can read the events that they happened in the order that they happened without missing any of it. To get context is really the main key. Okay, so yes, last week we did Luke, the beginning, where it says that he set in hand and put in order the events of the ministry of Yeshua so that we could have an accurate understanding of the things that happened. Then we went into John, where it talked about the pre-existence of Yeshua, Jesus, another word also known as Jesus. Yeshua, again, is his Hebrew name, which means Yah is salvation. So Yahweh is salvation because it says that he shall save his people from their sins. That's why he was given the name Jesus. Or in the Hebrew, which has the meaning, which is a little phrase, Yahshua. So now we are on Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. So each of the books have been put in order for their introductions, right? So Luke first introduces that he's set in order to put things together, or set in hand to put things in order. And then John gives his introduction as Jesus is from the beginning. Now Matthew gives his genealogy as his beginning to show the ascent of Yeshua from Abraham, the patriarch of the nation of Israel, from whom the Messiah was prophesied to come and through whom the Messiah did come. It's a historical fact that Yeshua, also known as Jesus, was born, lived, died, and was resurrected historically 2,000 years ago. So, Matthew 1:1. This is the recorded genealogy of Yeshua the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham had a son named Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob. Jacob had Judah and his brothers. Judah then had two sons, one named Perez and the other named Zerah, by Tamar, Judah's widowed daughter-in-law. Perez had Hezron, and Hezron had Ram. Ram had Amminadab, and Amminadab had Nahshon. Nahshon had Solomon, and Solomon had Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz had Obed by Ruth. Obed had Jesse, and then Jesse had David the king. So this is the first section. Matthew's genealogy is broken up into three sections. The first section and the second section and the third section each have 14 names, and they're broken up specifically for a reason where they're broken up. And this first one begins with Abraham. It doesn't begin with Adam like Luke's actually descends down to Adam, and because Yeshua was a descendant of Adam, but he ascended to the throne because Matthew is about his kingship from Abraham. Abraham, as we know in Genesis 22:18, this is where Yahweh made the promise to Abraham that in his seed, which Paul emphasizes in Galatians 3:16, is in the singular, meaning that it was pointing to one individual, Yeshua, the Messiah. In your seed, Abraham, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Then that was again reiterated to Isaac when he was a man. It says that in Genesis 26:4. It's repeated, and it says, in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So God is beginning to single out a particular people for his Messiah to come through. Okay, and then Isaac had Jacob, and Jacob in Genesis 28:14, it says again, Yahweh promised Jacob, says, in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Future tense. So that's why Yahweh is known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is through that family line that the nation of Israel and the Messiah was going to come. And then it narrows it down even more into Judah. So Isaac had 12 sons, right? And one of the sons was named Judah. And Judah is prophesied in Genesis 49:10. It says that the scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. Shiloh again being a prophetic utterance of the Messiah, the prophetic name of him. Then Judah had two sons, Perez by Tamar, Perez and Zerah by Tamar. If you remember now, Tamar was the one who dressed up as a harlot, and Judah paid for her, but he didn't have money, so he left his signet ring and his staff, I believe, or something to that effect. And Tamar, when Judah was going to have her stoned for adultery, she pulled up this stuff to show it was Judah that actually had gotten her pregnant. And Judah had gotten her pregnant with Perez and Zerah. But Perez is the one that the line of the Messiah is drawn down through. And then from here on out, that section goes, Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, Nahshon, Salmon. And then it goes, so those are not really recorded as anything significant about them necessarily in the Bible, aside from being an ascent in the genealogy of the descent of Yahshua. And then Solomon had Boaz, and we have the whole book of Ruth, which is about Boaz. But Boaz, he was actually the son of Rahab. As we know, when the Israelites came out of Egypt and they entered, after the 40 years in the wilderness, they entered into the land of Israel. And on their way there, they first went into Jericho, and they marched around the city 7 days. And the last day, the walls fell. But when they sent spies in, they came to Rahab's house, and she believed in Yahweh, and she saved these spies by putting a red cord in the window, putting a red cord in the window, so that when the Israelites come, they would know that she was the one that helped save the spies, and then she was thus saved, and she joined herself with the nation of Israel, which begins a peculiar thing. We have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the family where the nation started, and then Judah and his brothers and went down into Egypt with Joseph and Benjamin and all that, and then they grew into a great nation, and then they came out of Israel, and now they're a nation, a peculiar nation for the Messiah to come through. And God, through pictures and miracles, demonstrates pictures of how the Messiah is going to be when he comes. And during that time now, it was all within that one nation. They were all not intermarrying with other nations at this point. But in Rahab, it appears to be is the first recorded account of a Gentile actually being grafted into the nation of Israel. And so she became as if she was an Israelite, one and the same. And you can read about Boaz, her son, in the book of Ruth. And Boaz was a righteous man, it says. And Boaz, again, had a Gentile woman, Ruth, a Moabitess, that came in and grafted herself. She was grafted into the nation of Israel as well by marrying Boaz. And Boaz was a kinsman redeemer, because if you remember the story, Ruth's husband had died, and being Naomi's daughter-in-law, there was a kinsman redeemer where Boaz could take her as his wife and have children for Ruth's husband in his name for him. But Boaz is the one in the genealogy now because of the kinsman redeemer relationship that he gained. And then Boaz had Obed, which interestingly enough means servant in Hebrew, Eved. And Obed had Jesse, which is the father of King David. So Obed was King David's grandfather, and Boaz was King David's great-great-grandfather. Now, all these people in here, there's not one disparaging word said about them. And they're an unbroken set of 14 people, not counting Abraham, of course. So his first descendant, Isaac, was number 1. Then Jacob was 2. Judah, number 3, and so on, down to King David. And King David was number 14. Then that begins the next section. The next section, then, is the kingship of Israel before the captivity in Babylon. And David, again, being the first one, who was the 14th in the last section. Now in this section, he's the first one. So like Abraham, it would begin with him, and then Solomon would be number 1, and so on down to, Jeconiah. Jeconiah would be 14. Now, a peculiar thing with this section of the genealogy is if you go into Chronicles and you look at the genealogy, here we have in Matthew, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah. It's all the same. Right? Perez, Hezron, Ram, all these that we mentioned is not a disparaging word about them, and it's a direct descendant. There's no missing names in this thing. There's no break in it, as you will. And it comes down to King David. Then it begins this new line here, where you have Solomon, King David's son, and these were all the descendants now of the king, and they inherited the throne after David. So after Solomon came Rehoboam. Then after Rehoboam, Abijah, and then Asa, and Jehoshaphat, Joram. And they're identical in Matthew and Chronicles, again, down to Joram. And then Joram, it makes a shift. In Chronicles, it has Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah. And then you have Azariah, which is the same as Uzziah. It's the same person, just a different variance of the name. And then Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh. So again, there's an identical here. But the peculiar thing is, why does Matthew leave these out? These 3 out? Well, if you look at the acts of these kings, Joram is where it started to get introduced Baal worship into the nation of Israel. It's where the kingship started to degrade. Because Jehoshaphat was righteous. Rehoboam, Solomon, David, they were all following after Yahweh, though imperfect, and did not do everything perfectly. And Solomon did have led astray by his women, but he did still worship Yahweh. And just like us, we have, faults and failures, that we are not perfectly perfect, if you will, in living according to what Yahweh has for us. But the main characteristic would be that if we're alive in Yeshua, that we are His. We're bought with a price. We are sealed with a promise. And Solomon was of that, but he had some faults. Same with all of them. But they are unique, Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah, in the fact that they worshipped Baal and false idols. And Joash was actually a half-breed. He was from the tribe of Judah and also from the tribe of Omri, a wicked tribe. Okay, and Ahaziah, he only reigned 1 year, so he's kind of insignificant in the kingship on top of that. And then you have Amaziah, and actually I'm not sure if Ahaziah was actually wicked. I'd have to go back and look at that, but we know that his reign was insignificant. And then these two were wicked, and it wasn't until Uzziah, who was then identified as being a child of God in a sense, and he actually got leprosy for disobeying God, indicating that God was his God, but he was disobedient. And it's very consistent with scripture that talks about that you will be taken out of the Lamb's book of life if you continue in rebellion against God. If that's who you are, and that's who these people were, Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah. They were in rebellion against God, and that's who they were, and they were excluded from the genealogy. And that's why Matthew doesn't have it. There's no rule of absolute truth that says the genealogies have to be directly descendants, father to son to grandson, right? Because we know in other places of the Bible that, as we saw at Boaz, and as part of the genealogy necessarily, and we'll see some anomalies to that. But generally, that's the thing that's going on here. And so again, we have Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, and then Amon. He was idolatrous, and he was assassinated. And then you have Josiah, and again, Jehoiakim and Jeconiah, it says, were wicked. And Jeconiah was cursed and said that he would not any longer have a king reigning, his descendant on the throne, which was given to David. It says that his throne would be for an everlasting kingdom, meaning the Messiah would reign in his place. His descendant, the Messiah, would reign as king in his place. The same with Solomon, that God said that his throne would last forever. But in Jeconiah, he was cursed, and that his descendants would not sit on the throne. And that's an important key. So that's the second section of 14 people. Then you have them carried off into Babylon. And then the third section in Matthew's genealogy, here we again have breaks. We have in Chronicles Zedekiah and Asir, and only in Matthew and Chronicles is Shealtiel. And then again there's Malchiram and Pedaiah. These are not listed in Matthew's genealogy until we get to Zerubbabel. And Zerubbabel was significant in the re-establishment of Israel in the nation after the Babylonian captivity. So that's why his name is mentioned. And then a peculiar thing goes on. In Matthew, not another name agrees. They're all completely different from the names that are in Chronicles. Right? So there was a change here now when the nation of Israel came back. There was no more prophetic scriptures that zeroed out somebody, identified somebody as the line from which the Messiah would come. And so from Zerubbabel, people started probably hoping that their line would be the line of the Messiah. And so lots of different families, it seems, started to collect their genealogies. And during the time of Yahshua, when he was here in the first century, walking the earth, there was a bunch of families who kept their genealogy, hoping that the Messiah would come through them. And it just so happens that this line, which was kept, and they kept these in the temple, in the house of God in Jerusalem, that this line was the one that the Messiah eventually did come through. But since the curse was given to Jeconiah that his descendant would not be to the throne, this is Joseph, the husband of Mary's genealogy. But as we know, Yeshua was born of a virgin. He was not born through this messianic line, or through this kingly line, even though he was adopted into family again, similar to the kinsman redeemer, where his adopted father, if you will, in the flesh was Joseph, the husband of Mary. So those are the genealogies, and again, that's 14. And it says we have here, after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconiah and Shealtiel had Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel had Abiud, Abiud had Eliakim, Eliakim had Azor, Azor had Zadok, Zadok had Achim, and Achim had Eliud, Eliud had Eleazar, Eleazar had Mathan, and Mathan had Jacob. Then Jacob had Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Yeshua was born, who is called Christ. The Greek word, which is in Hebrew, Messiah. So here Matthew points out, when the genealogy is purified, there are 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations from David until the captivity in Babylon, and 14 generations from the captivity in Babylon up to the Christ. Christ being a Greek translation of the Hebrew word Messiah, which means anointed one. So it's not coincidence. These are not coincidences, and it does perfectly fall into 14 categories when you understand the reason why the particular people were left out of the genealogy in Matthew. And there we have the list. And those are in 1 Chronicles 2, chapters 2 through 4, and then Matthew 1, 1 through 17. Which now brings us to the next section, which we are now going back to Luke, because these are the things. The next introduction for Luke would be the genealogy that he has, and that's not yet in the sequence of Luke's book, and so it is not brought up here. But we are beginning now in the verse 5, directly after the verse we left off from in the beginning, where he set in hand to put in order the account. verses 1 through 4, and now it begins again with verse 5. It says, in the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zacharias. He was from the division of Abijah. He had a wife who was a descendant of Aaron. Her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous according to God's approval, going into all the commandments and requirements of the Lord without fault. But Elizabeth, being barren, they were childless even into their old age. One important point to point out here is that here it says he had a wife who was a descendant of Aaron. Now Aaron was the brother of Moses, right? And they were from what tribe? From the tribe of Levi. So there's this teaching or this thought out there that there were during the Babylonian captivity, 10 of the 12 tribes became lost and unidentifiable, and that only the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin remained. But here in the New Testament we have a direct contradiction to that, because here we know for a fact that Elizabeth was a descendant of Levi. She's from the tribe of Levi. And in another account in the Gospels, it talks about Anna, who was in the temple and saw the baby Yeshua when his parents brought him there. And it says that she was from the tribe of Asher. So there we have 4 tribes: Judah, Benjamin, Levi, and Asher. Those are all were identifiable in the first century. And I would conclude that, or I would venture to say that they were all identifiable, because it wasn't that long of a time period when they were in Babylonian captivity, and they stayed distinct as a people, the Jewish people in the captivity. Some of them did integrate with the nations, but a lot of them kept distinct, thus them returning to the nation of Israel as a peculiar people under the leadership of Nehemiah and Zerubbabel and such. Okay, so we have Elizabeth being a descendant of Levi, which we know Elizabeth is Mary's aunt, so they're related. Okay, so that's significant. Alright, so this is how it happened. While Zacharias was serving in the line of his division as priest before God, having gone into the Lord's house, his lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, fell to burn incense. While he was serving in the holy place at the hour of incense, a large number of people were outside. Now here is an interesting point. It says that Zacharias was serving the line of his division as priest before God. Now up here we know the division was the division of Abijah. And these divisions are broken up here in 1 Chronicles 24, verses 1 through 19. And if you go to the Mishnah, they know when these certain divisions, like the line of Abijah, where it fell in the year. And each division had 2 times that they were appointed to a year. And I won't get into all that, but the point is that we can identify when John the Baptist was conceived during this time, which was during the division of Abijah, which is significant for the fact that there's a lot of calculation. I'm not going to get into it, but you can research this stuff and find out that there's indication that John the Baptist was actually born on Passover. And there we have in the Passover Seder, if you're familiar with that, is that it says that Elijah will come, and the descendants of Israel these days, when they celebrate Passover, leave a place for Elijah, and they go and look at the door to see if Elijah is going to come. And we know from Yeshua, speaking of John the Baptist, he said that he is Elijah to come if you're able to receive it. And we'll get more into that later, because Elijah is going to come before the day of the Lord. But John the Baptist, if you can receive it, was Elijah to come. So as we go into it, we'll talk about it a little more. Okay, but just keep that in mind. So this is how it happened. While Zacharias was serving in the line of his division as priest before God, having gone into the Lord's house, his lot according to the custom of the priesthood fell to burn incense. While he was serving at the holy place at the hour of incense, a large number of people were outside praying. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared to Zacharias, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zacharias saw him, fear came over him, and he was troubled. Okay, here's a little illustration, which has come from Glen Cairn Museum You can't really read it here, and actually it's not an A, it should be an E here. It's Cairn Museum, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, .org. That's where this picture is from. And this picture is an illustration or a model of the temple, the house of God. And here we have the Ark of the Covenant, and there's the holy place, or the most holy place, separated by the curtain that was torn when Yeshua rose from the grave. And then here you have the altar of incense, then you have the menorah, and you have the table of the showbread. And here would be the picture of the priest, which in this case would be Zacharias, where he was at this altar of incense, according to his division of Abijah. And it says on the right side, on this side, while he was there, it says that the angel of Gabriel appeared to him. That's where it happened. It says, the angel said, do not fear, Zacharias, for your request is heard. Your wife Elizabeth will give birth to a son, and you will name him John. So it's most likely that Zacharias, when he was going in there, one of his prayers, which incense are, is a picture of prayers going up to God. And they understood that as a picture. They understood the house of God. Not all of them. Some of them didn't take it by faith. It took it as if it were by works. But those who did take it by faith understood these pictures. And when Zechariah went in there to meet with the Lord, he was praying, as it's indicating here, for his wife Elizabeth to conceive, because it was breaking her heart, as we'll see. And likewise, if it breaks a woman's heart, it breaks a man's heart, or her husband's heart. Your wife Elizabeth will give birth to your son, and you will name him John. You will be joyful and glad. Many others also will rejoice when he is born, for he will be great in the Lord's sight. He shall drink neither wine nor fermented drink. He will be filled with the Holy and set-apart Spirit of God, even from his mother's womb. He will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God, and will go before him in the power and spirit of Elijah. And here we go. Call him John the Baptist Elijah, or in the spirit of Elijah, because he actually isn't Elijah. That's why Jesus later on talks about it as if you're able to accept it. And we'll explain that more later as we get to it. But something that needs to be pointed out is here it says, he will be filled with the holy and set apart Spirit of God. In the Greek, which this is a translation from, is the word agios. Agios pneuma theos, basically. Which in our language, in English, holy has become to have a different meaning than it had originally in the Hebrew and then in the Greek as it was adopted by the Israeli people. So holy doesn't mean like necessarily someone really righteous or things like that. It has more the idea of someone being set apart. They're set apart for a specific thing. They've been made holy. They've been separated for something. So I've put both those words in there to kind of draw out both things, but in the Greek it's just the word agios, but which means set apart, Spirit of God. So we try to, in this translation, to translate every word, including Yeshua and baptism and agios and things like that, and that's what we have here. So John was designated for what he was to do before he was even born. So this is not coming from his ingenuity. He didn't come out and be born as a young man, decide, you know what, I'd really like to be a prophet of God, and I'm going to go before the Messiah, I'm going to work really hard, and I'm going to make something of my life, and I'm going to be this. It wasn't that at all. This was a man that God had chosen before he was conceived in the womb for the purpose that he had him. All right. And his purpose was to turn the father's hearts to the children, to cause restoration, basically. And to those who are disobedient, to turn into the wisdom of the making ready a people prepared for the Lord. So that's what John the Baptist's purpose was, and it should be our purpose, is to prepare the way for the people for the Lord. And that's what we've been called in the Great Commission, to go out and make disciples. Okay, Luke 1 verse 18, Zacharias said to the angel, how can I be sure of this? For I am an old man, and my wife is also well advanced in years. So she's beyond childbirth, so this is a miracle. And Zacharias is doubting. Okay, you don't want to do that, right? Because if God tells you something, especially if he sends an angel to do it, you don't want to do that. And I can give an example how it apply today, right? One day I was walking home from work years ago, and I heard clearly in my head, not my thoughts, something I was thinking about something. I think I was studying Hebrew actually at the time. I had these tapes that I would listen to, and as I was going through this, I heard outside of my head, inside my head, but not coming from me, not an audio voice, but a thought that was put into my head from outside of me saying, "Don't buy insurance." And my reaction right off the bat was like, what? And I'm not even, where did that come from? I wasn't even planning on buying insurance. I wasn't even thinking anything about it, right? So I'm continue walking. And I think, well, that was weird. I don't know where that thought came from. And as soon as I walk in the door of my apartment, the phone rings, and lo and behold, I don't get it, right? I'm not making the connection here, but what was it? It was a salesman trying to sell me credit card insurance. And I was like, I don't need insurance. I don't believe in that. I trust the Lord, blah, blah, blah. And they had this tag team thing going on. He brought another guy on, and they just kept talking and saying all this stuff. And finally, I was just bought into it. I was thinking in my head, oh, I'll just cancel it later, right? So I accepted this insurance. They took a $500 charge off of my credit card, and I could not find how to contact these people to get rid of this charge. So they stole $500 from me, basically, because there was no insurance. I did not get anything mailed to me in the mail or anything. But anyway, I suffered the cost because I didn't listen to the Lord. I didn't believe him when he was speaking to me. You could say it's a stretch, maybe, but I'm convinced that that's what happened with me. All right, but here now it says, the angel answered, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and I was sent here to speak to you. And you're kind of just saying it doesn't mean anything to you, right? I was sent here to bring you this good news. But now look, you will be mute and unable to talk until that day these things happen, since you did not believe what I told you, things that will be fulfilled at their appointed time. I mean, what is this? Zacharias goes into the house of God. He's at the altar of incense, and he prays for this thing. His prayers are answered. God sends a miraculous, angel there to tell him this stuff, and he doubts it. So God took away his voice for a short time. I mean, what lack of faith? He's praying for that. God answers him, and he still doesn't believe it. And we all do that. We have no right to condemn him for it because we do the very same things. Which brings up a point. It's a side point, but let me get back to text in a minute. But there's a discussion about Adam, right? Did Adam bring sin into the world? It doesn't say that. It says that through Adam, death entered the world, and sin through that. Well, no, I think it does say in the New Testament that sin entered the world, and through sin, death. But it doesn't mean that there would have been no sin if Adam didn't sin. Like, if he would have not sinned on there, that the rest of history would have gone on, and we all would have been righteous people. The thing is that Adam was an example of all of us. And if we were in his place, we would have done the same thing. If it wasn't Adam, it would have been me. It would have been you. Right? So it's like this one guy I have heard said on the radio, which I will not mention the guy's name because I don't think he teaches accurate biblically. But one does have some things right. And the one thing that he says is, I don't understand the rock that people stand on to throw rocks at other people. Because we are all in the same boat. We are all in need of God's mercy and his grace. All right, so the people were waiting for Zacharias and marveled that he was staying in the Lord's house so long. This is not typical for someone to do the incense because they do this all the time. Every division goes in there and does this on a regular basis. And they're noticing that something else is going on here with Zacharias. And then it says when he came out, he could not speak to them. Therefore, they realized that he had seen an appearance. It's almost like they got a little bit more faith than him. They didn't see the angel appear, but they knew that it was an angel from Yahweh, right? They realized this because he did not speak to them, but rather motioned with his hands. So they could see that something happened to him, and he was probably very excited, motioning with his hands, acting a little Italian, right? Which I think the Jews probably did that first. They're very passionate people. And yes. Okay, so it was. Once he had finished the days of his service, Zacharias went home. After that, his wife Elizabeth conceived. Following this, she hid for 5 months. And I need to make a correction. The conception was actually before the Passover, but because we know when it was, they calculate, and I haven't done the calculation, I've read other people who've done it, that when they calculated that John the Baptist, his birth falls on Passover. And you'd have to research that on your own to get the details on that if you'd like. But so she conceived, and she hid for 5 months, saying, "This is how the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he considered me, to take away my cause for disgrace among people." So who knows what people were saying about her. She's probably in sin. That's why she's not conceiving. She wants a baby, and God's not giving it to her because she's like Micah, King David's first wife. And she had some wickedness in her heart about David, and so God closed her womb, and now God's closed the womb on Elizabeth. And look at that lady over there. Look at her. There she goes. So she was probably disgraced a lot. Which, goes back to that big rock you stand on. You do not know another person's heart, and you do not know their relationship with God. Only they truly know it. You can judge them by their fruit, but you can't judge by circumstances like that and say that there's a problem with them necessarily, because God may be doing it for another reason. Trials come on all of us. Came on Job, and he was a righteous man. He did not do anything to cause those trials to come upon him. The Lord was testing him and trying him and growing him. And he does that with all of us. So you can have consequences for sin, like I did with not listening to the voice of the Lord with the insurance, and I paid for that. But there's times too where you will have these trials in your life, and it's not because you did something wrong. It's because God is putting that in your life to grow you, basically. Okay, in the 6th month of her pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth. Okay, so 6 months after Elizabeth, Mary's aunt, conceived, then the angel Gabriel went to Nazareth, a city in Galilee, to a virgin engaged to a man named Joseph, a descendant of King David, as we looked in the genealogy in Matthew. Her name was Mary, or Miriam. The angel came in and said to her, "Rejoice, you are a woman richly blessed, for the Lord is with you." When he said this, she was very troubled and wondered where this greeting was coming from. In the Greek, it literally says what country it was from, basically, which means where is this greeting coming from in our vernacular. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. Now behold, you will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and you will call him Yahshua. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob for all eternity." Here we go. This is the fulfillment of King David, what was promised was made to King David and to Solomon, that your throne, King David, the descendant, will reign on your throne for all eternity, and there will be no limit to his kingdom. David understood this as pointing to the Messiah. Solomon understood it. The prophets, Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they all understood this. Even Adam, we won't get into it in this series here, but even Adam and Eve were aware that there was a Messiah coming. There was a prophecy given right from the beginning, and it's all throughout the Old Testament. So for anybody out there who says the Old Testament is done away with and it's no good anymore, you're wrong. Yeshua is all over the Old Testament. And I would prefer to call it the First Covenant. He's all over it. It was all about him. It was all pointing to him. And that's why on the road to Emmaus it says that he opened the scriptures to them, which was not the New Testament. There was only the Old Testament at that point. And it says he opened the scriptures to them, and their hearts burned within them. So Mary continues, says, "How can this be?" Mary asked, "since I have never been to bed with a man?" Okay, it's a little different than Zechariah. She's not doubting that it could happen. She just doesn't see how it can happen because, it's not like, Elizabeth had a husband. Mary doesn't have anybody. How is she gonna do this? Right? The angel said to her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. This is why the Holy One who will be born will be called the Son of God. And look, Gabriel says, your relative Elizabeth in her old age has also conceived and is carrying a son. She who was said to be incapable of having children is now in the 6th month of her pregnancy. For nothing will be impossible with God. So God's giving her a little encouragement, saying, look, I did it with Sarah, right? Now I did it with Elizabeth. And this shows you that I can do this. Elizabeth was past childbearing age. So was Sarah. She was as good as they were as good as not having a husband, right? But I did it with them. Mary, I will do it with you. Nothing is impossible with God. Okay, so what's Mary's response? Mary's humbly receives that and says, "Behold, I am the Lord's servant. Let it happen to me just as you said." And then the angel left Gabriel. What did Mary do? She said, "I got to see this," right? So just then, Mary got up and quickly traveled to the city in the hill country of Judea. So she walked from the Galilee down to Judea, and she went into the house of Zacharias and called to Elizabeth. Like, there's no indication here that she sat and waited for a month first. Like, she went right away, right? Because people will say, well, she didn't really conceive, 6 months after John the Baptist was conceived. Could have been months later. It was like, no, she went directly over there, and listen to what it says. It says, when Elizabeth heard Mary's voice, she was filled with the Holy Spirit, and the baby leaped in her womb. In response, Elizabeth raised her voice and said loudly, "Among women you are blessed, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." Why did John the Baptist inside Elizabeth's belly jump? Because the Messiah was in his presence. But why should you, the mother of my Lord, come to visit me? For behold, as soon as I heard your voice, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. Blessed are you who has believed, Mary, for what the Lord has told you will be fulfilled. Which was that her seed that she was conceived with would reign on David's throne for all eternity. Mary responded, "My entire soul declares the Lord great, and my spirit has rejoiced in God my Savior, for he has looked upon the lowly state of his bondslave with favor. Behold, from now on all generations will say that I am blessed. The Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy is from generation to generation on those who fear him. He has done mighty things with his arm. He has thrown into confusion those who are proud in the inner thoughts of their heart. He has taken down the rulers from their thrones and lifted up those who are lowly." So lowly, just like Elizabeth was disgraced, he raised her up. And Mary, who is nobody, she's not a king, she's not a daughter of a king, she's not a queen, whatever, but God even blessed her. God is not a respecter of persons. He blesses those he chooses to bless. And it's not according to their status, as we looked at in John. It's not according to their blood, their bloodline. It's not according to their desire to have it, like John the Baptist didn't desire to have his position. It's just who God created him to be. So you need to be alive in Yeshua through him working and causing you to come to life, not through efforts of the flesh, because by the flesh, no one will be saved. And if you are not born again, you cannot be saved. You cannot see the kingdom of heaven unless one is born again. And we will talk about that in Zacharias. Despite what some may say, and I've had people say it, says you can't be, it's one obscure verse and you're making too much of a little thing. You're majoring on the minors, all that stuff. Well, no, it's pretty adamant. You cannot see the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't say you might not be able to. It says you cannot see the kingdom of heaven unless you are born again. And that would include who? All those in the first covenant, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, David, Solomon, all those people. They had to have been born again. And we will talk about that, the first covenant and the new covenant. There is a new covenant and there is a difference. But we'll have to get into that later. Just stay tuned. Keep going with me here. So Mary stayed with Elizabeth about 3 months and then went home. So it seems like that Mary stayed there with Elizabeth until Elizabeth gave birth, because in the 6th month of her pregnancy this happened. She went there, then 3 months later, 9, 10 months basically is the birth of a child, and then she went home. So now Mary is 3 months pregnant when she went home. And so that would be 9 months pregnancy. It would be 6 months later from here. So 6 months from now, Yeshua is born. So John the Baptist was born on Passover, and he was the Elijah of Passover, of Yeshua's first coming. Then 6 months after this falls into Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And there seems to be indication of this, that Yeshua was actually born on the Feast of Tabernacles, as it says in John, that the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. That word, I don't know all the particular translations, but in the actual Greek text, it says that he tabernacled among us. It uses that same word. So he became flesh and tabernacled among us. So it seems likely that he was born on the Feast of Tabernacles. And all Yeshua's first coming events and his crucifixion and resurrection happened on feasts. So it is very likely that his birth as well happened on those times. And as we'll get into later in the Gospels, that his second coming also correspond to the fall feast. And we'll see that. And the full fulfillment of Sukkot in its fullness. It was like partially fulfilled at his birth, but it will be fully fulfilled at his second coming. And that's the section for this week. We will continue again next week. And if you have any questions, you can email them. I would be happy to answer them. This is a live chat. We'll be on every Friday evening at 7:30 Eastern Time, I believe it is. And there's a chat. The chat room will be open. And if you email me any questions, we can answer it there, and I'll answer it on here on the live broadcast, or you can join us in the chat, either way. But the email is aliveinyeshua@gmail.com. So it's aliveinyeshua@gmail.com. See you next week. Shabbat Shalom.